Hey, what's up guys? It's Pedro here from newcoder.com, and in this tutorial we're going to learn how to install Node.js as well as learn how to actually run code using Node.js. So to get started, we're going to actually have to download Node.js. So if you go to Google and type Node.js download, you should get a web page similar to this, and I will be leaving a link in the description in case you can't find it. So go ahead and download 8.11.3 LTS. Now, once you download that, run it, install it, enjoy all that good stuff. And within these tutorials, I'm going to be using Visual Studio Code. And if you don't know what Visual Studio Code is, it's an editor. Now, you can use whatever editor you want, but the reason I'm using Visual Studio Code is because it has an integrated command prompt. So once you download these two things, I'm just going to head over to my desktop and let's create a new folder. And I'm just going to say Node.js tutorial. And now I'm just going to head over to Visual Studio Code, and you should have a welcome screen like this. Go to File, Open Folder. And we are going to open the folder that we just created. So I'm just going to select this. And now I'm just going to hit Control N. Control N is going to create a new file. I'm going to hit Control S. And we are going to save this file. And I'm just going to say app.js. And this is going to be a very, very simplistic JavaScript file. And we are just going to run it. And this is just a test to see if you installed Node.js correctly. So if I hit console.log hello world from Node.js. Now if I save this, and I'm actually going to exit out of this, but you saw that this just popped up on my screen. If I go to terminal, here is our command prompt. So I'm just going to exit this to show you how you could bring this up whenever you want to run code using the terminal. So I'm just going to close this. I'm going to hit Control B. I am going to go to View. I'm going to go to Integrated Terminal. Now by default, Visual Studio Code has it on PowerShell. So if I go up here, you can notice that mine says CMD. So if I hit Control-Shift-P and type default, I could say select default shell. Now I have 3 terminals installed on my computer. You probably have PowerShell and you probably have command prompt. And I also have Git. Go ahead and click command prompt. Hit this plus button. This is going to bring up a new terminal. So if I was to hit this, it'll bring up another CMD, and this should say CMD. So I'm just going to remove, for me, I'm going to remove one since I already have one open. And now all I'm going to do is type node and then the name of the file. So the name of the file that we just created was called app.js. And here we go. We get an output of hello world from Node.js. Now let's say that you're not using Visual Studio Code for whatever reason. You have your own editor of choice. What you can do is you hit the start menu, type CMD, and then go to command prompt. And then you can see that we get something very similar to the integrated command prompt, but we're in a different location. So if I go to my desktop, open this folder. Let's copy the path that this folder is located. So I'm just going to hit Control C to copy. Head over to my command prompt. I'm just going to type CD. CD stands for change directory. All that means is, hey, change folder. So right now I am in a folder called users, Pedro Mercado. I need to be in this folder. So now I'm just going to click this. Go down to edit, click paste, and that's our path. So now if I hit enter, you can see that our path has changed. And now if I type node app.js, you can see that we get a hello world from Node. So either way is fine. If you want to use Visual Studio Code and its integrated terminal, you're more than welcome to. If you're using a different editor and it doesn't have its own integrated terminal, you're more than welcome to use the command prompt. In this tutorial, we're going to be talking about Node modules. All a Node module is basically a JavaScript file. It's a way to separate concerns for our application. So for example, let's say that I have an app.js file. And in this app.js file, I have math, a bunch of API requests, and database calls. Instead of putting them all in one file, what we can do is separate each of those concerns into their own files. So to get started, I'm just going to hit Control B. I'm going to say Control N. So we're going to create a new file. And I'm just going to say Control S. And we're going to save it as tutorial.js. Let's save that. Control B. And now we can focus on this new file or this new module called tutorial.js. So to get started, let's actually give our tutorial module something. So I'm going to give it a function. So I'm going to say const sum. And it's going to have two parameters, and all it's going to do is add and return them. So num1 plus num2. Next, what I want to end up doing is I want to expose this function to the outside world. Because right now, if I hit Control S, and if I was to try to use this function, so I'm just going to delete this. So if I was just to say sum 1 plus 1, and if we were to actually run this, you can see that we get an error. Sum is not defined. So you might be saying, why is sum not defined? I just defined it here. Well, I need to expose this function for the outside world to use. So I need to let Node know that this sum function within my tutorial module is available to be used. So in order to do that, all I need to do is type module.export and pass it in sum, like so. Now that this is available to be used, I need to tell my app.js file where this sum function is located. So what I can do here is declare a variable. So I'm just going to say const tutorial, and now I'm just going to use the word require, and then we're going to give it a path. Now the path is ./. So where did I get ./ from? ./ means that it's within the same exact path that this file is currently in, where app.js. So if I was to hit Control B, you can see that app.js is on the same level as tutorial.js, and that they're in the same folder called Node.js tutorial. So if I hit Control B again, get rid of that, and then I pass in the name of the file, which is obviously tutorial.js. Now you do not need to pass in the extension. All you need to do is pass in the name of the file. Node.js automatically assumes that it is a JavaScript file. And now, if I was to print out tutorial, so let's see what's inside it. And now let's get rid of our sum call. We're going to call sum a little bit later. I just want to show you what the variable tutorial has. So if I was to save this, and let's scroll down, I'm going to type CLS, hit enter. That's going to clear the terminal. And now I'm just going to run node app. And you can see that tutorial now holds a function called sum from our tutorial module. So now if I want to actually use that function, I could say tutorial and pass in 1 plus 1. And let's actually print out the results. So I'm just going to say console.log it. Let's save it. Execute it again. And you can see that we get our desired output of 2, and that we are indeed importing from our tutorial module the sum function. So now that we know how to do that, how would we import multiple stuff from modules. So for example, if we head back to our tutorial module, let's say I have multiple functions or multiple variables or even a class. How do I export more than one thing? Well, what you can do is I can say, and just for the sake of example, let's add more stuff. So I can say const pi, and I'm just going to set this to 3.14, and let's create a class, and I'm going to say some math object. Let's give it a constructor, and I'm just going to say object created. Okay, so now I have some pi and some math object. Now I want all three of these to be exposed to the outside world so that app.js, for example, can require them and then use it. So how do I do that? Well, one way to do that is to add properties to the module.exports object. So for example, I could say .sum, and I'm just going to copy this. So now exports.sum is going to have the sum function. Exports.pi is going to hold the value of 3.14. So I just set it equal to pi. And some math object is going to be module.exports.some math object is going to be equal to some math object. Now if I was to save this, head over to app, and let's just remove this for now. I want to print out what tutorial is holding once we require from our tutorial module. So if I save this, and now let's execute this, you can see that we're getting an object back. Tutorial is now an object. And now this object has the properties of sum, and it tells you that it's a function, pi, the value of pi, and some math object. And you can see that it's our class. And now if I want to execute this, it'll be like accessing a normal object. So for example, we have tutorial, and let's say we want to use the sum function. Instead of just saying tutorial and then passing the two numbers, I could say tutorial sum and pass in the two numbers. And I'm just going to copy this. Let's paste this 2 more times. And now if I want to print pi, I could say tutorial pi. And within here, the same thing for the object. I could say new tutorial dot some math object, and that's going to create a new instance of our some math object. And now if I was to save this and run it, you can see that it executes as expected. So tutorial sum gives us 2, pi has the value of 3.14, and you can see that our constructor gets executed, object created. One more thing to show you before I wrap this up. If this is an ugly syntax for you, for example, saying module.exports.sum equals this, module.exports.pi is a bit repetitive. What we can do is, instead of exporting each of these individually, I'm going to, let's remove 2 of them. And instead, what we can do is export an object literal and tag along the properties. So I could say sum is going to be sum, pi is going to be pi, and then some math object is going to be some math object. And if I'm to save this and now execute it, we should get the same exact result. So let's execute that. You can see that it's working beautifully. In this tutorial, we're going to be talking about the events module, particularly the EventEmitter class within the events module. Now, all the events module allows us to do is basically bring event-driven programming to Node.js. So to get started, we're going to actually have to require the event module. Now the events module is actually built into Node.js. So I'm just going to say const EventEmitter. Now this is going to be the class that we get from requiring from the events module. And I'm just going to say equal require event. Now from here, we're going to have to create a new instance of the event emitter. So I'm just going to say const event emitter. I'm going to say new event emitter. So from here, we're going to start getting into event-driven programming. Now that I have my event emitter object, let's actually attach a listener to it. So I'm just going to say event emitter. And I'm going to call the method on. Now, this method takes on two arguments. One is the listener that you want to attach to this object. So I'm just going to call it tutorial for this example. And the second argument is going to be the function that you want to execute when this tutorial event occurs. So let's just pass in this function. And all I'm going to say is console.log tutorial event has occurred. So now if I save this and run it, so I'm just going to hit Control S to save. And I'm just going to say node app. You can see that nothing happens within our terminal. Now why is that? Well, I have this object. I've attached a listener called tutorial, but I haven't emitted a tutorial event. Remember, this code here is only going to be executed when a tutorial event occurs. So now let's emit a tutorial event. So I'm just going to say event emitter. And now I'm just going to pass in tutorial as the first argument. And that's it. So now if I was to hit Control S to save, and now execute this one more time, you can see that our tutorial event gets triggered whenever we call the emit method. So now what happens when we actually want this function to have parameters? Well, I could give it parameters, so I could say num1, num2. And just for argument's sake, so just to show on the console, we're going to print out the sum of num1 and num2. So now how would I call it down here with the emit method? Well, I'll just pass it in as an argument. So I could pass in 1 and 2. So if I save this now, and now go to Node app, you can see that we get the value of 3. So you just pass in the arguments. Now this is all fine and dandy, but how would I create a custom object which takes advantage of using events? Well, I could just inherit from the event emitter class. So for example, let's say that I want to create a person class. So I say class person, and I could just extend from the event emitter class. And now from here, let's give it a constructor. Now let's call our super function. So I'm just going to say super. And this is going to allow us to use the this property within our class. And now I'm just going to say this dot underscore name is going to be assigned the value of name. And now let's actually pass in name to our constructor. And now let's give this person class a getter. So I'm just going to say get name. And all this is going to do is just return this dot underscore name. So now that we have our person class defined, let's actually create a new instance of it. So I'm just going to go down here and I'm just going to say let Pedro equal new person. And let's pass in Pedro. And now here, remember, when I say new person, person extends the event emitter class, which means that Pedro is also an instance of the event emitter class. So now I can add a listener to the pager object. So I could just say pager.on, and I'm just going to call it name, and we're going to pass in our function. And I'm just going to print out my name is so-and-so. So I'm just going to say console.log my name is, and we're just going to say Pedro.name. So now that we've attached our listener, obviously we're going to have to call the emit method. So we're going to emit the event has occurred. So I'm just going to say Pedro.emit, and we're going to pass in name. And now if I was to save this and now execute this, you can see that we get the desired output of my name is Pedro. So that's how you would extend using the event emitters class. And for our final example, let's say that we have more than one person object. So I'm just going to create a new person. I'm just going to call, let's make it a girl. I'm just going to call her Christina. I'm going to say new person, and we're going to pass in Christina. Now let's add a listener to the Christina object. So I'm just going to say Christina.on name. And you could use a loop for this, but since I'm only creating two person objects, it doesn't make sense for this example, but you can use a loop to do this all in one shot. And we are just going to copy this, paste this in here, and I'm just going to say Christina.name. All right, so why did I go through the bother of showing you that we created two person objects and attach listeners to it? Well, what I want to show you is that when you emit an event to occur, the event gets executed synchronously. So for example, if I say Pedro and then I say Christina, and now if I was to save this and now execute it, you can see that these get executed synchronously. So because Pedro emitted first, Pedro gets executed first, and then our Christina object. So they get executed in the order that they emitted in. So they execute synchronously. In this tutorial, we're going to be talking about the ReadLine module. Now, what the ReadLine module allows us to do is prompt the user as well as get user input. So to get started, we're going to have to require the module. So I'm just going to say const readline is equal to require readline, and this is going to bring in our readline module. Next, we're going to have to create an instance of the readline interface by using the create interface method. So I'm just going to say readline.create interface, and within here is going to take an object. Now we're going to give this object two properties, and this is basically our configuration file. So the first property I'm going to give it is input, and then we're going to give it an object. Now this object is called process. Now process is a global object, so you don't have to require it. It's already given to us by Node. And then here we're going to say std in. Now input is going to be the std in input stream. And then here we obviously need an output. So I'm just going to say output, and we're going to give it process.std out. And that's going to stand for output stream. Now when this method is executed, it's going to return our readline interface object. So let's save it inside a variable so we can use it. So I'm just going to say const rl is equal to this. Now let's say I want to ask the user what two numbers added together are equal to. So for this example, I'm just going to generate two random numbers between 1 and 10. So I'm just going to say let num1 equal math.floor math.random, and we're going to times this by 10, and we're going to shift it over by 1. So this is going to give us a random number between 1 and 10. Let's copy this twice. paste it, 2, and we need the answer. So I'm just going to say let answer equal num1 plus num2. All right. So now that we have this, we're ready to ask the user what these two numbers are equal to. Now, in order to do that, I'm going to use our ReadLine interface. And our ReadLine interface has a method called question. So I'm going to say RL question. Now, the first argument is going to be a string. The second argument is going to be a function. And basically, the first argument is going to be the question we would like to ask the user. So I'm just going to say backtick, what is num1 plus num2? Question mark. And I'm just going to hit enter here because I want you guys to see this on one line. And we're going to include our callback. Now this function is going to get the user input as a parameter. So I'm just going to say user input. And for now, I'm just going to print out user input onto the console, just so you guys can see that it's actually working. So now if I was to save this, head over to my console, type node app. It's going to say what is 4 plus 2. I'm going to say banana. And there you go. It prints out the user's input. It's important to note that if you take a look at our console, the application is still running. So I'm just going to hit Control-C to break out of it. And what we need to do is actually close the ReadLine interface when we're done using it. So in order to do that, let's actually add a couple of things. First thing, I want a new line right after this question mark here. So I'm just going to say /n. So when I prompt the user's input, instead of lining up right next to it, like so, is going to be underneath. All right, so I fixed that problem. Next thing I want to do is actually test the user input to see if he actually got the answer correct. So in order to do that, I'm just going to say if user input, and it's always important to trim the user's input if you ever accept anything from a user, just to get rid of the trailing white space. And we're just going to say if the user's input is equal to answer. So if they answer the math question correctly, I want to close the application. So I could say rl.close. And here, and now if I was to save this and now execute the program, so I'm just going to write node app. It's going to say what is 10 plus 4, and I'm going to answer with 14. And you can see that we answered it correctly, and therefore our application closed. Now what I want to do is actually add a listener to the close event. Now the ReadLine interface is actually an instance of the EventEmitter class. So what we can do is actually scroll down here, and I'll add it towards the end. And I want to say rl.on. And basically I'm going to say, hey, I want you to listen for an event to occur. And I'm going to say close. And we're going to give it a callback. And this function is only going to execute when we close the ReadLine interface. So now I'm just going to say console.log. And basically I just want to let the user know that, hey, you got the correct answer. So I'm just going to say correct. So now if I was to save this and now execute it, node app, what is 6 plus 3? I'm just going to write 9. You can see that correct gets printed out onto the console. Now correct gets printed out onto the console because when we use the method close, it emits the close event. And since we're listening for a close event, this callback function gets executed. And on that note, I better add a semicolon on there, and let's save that. So now that we handled what happens when the user inputs correctly, what happens if the user gets the wrong answer? So in order to do that, let's create an else statement within our question method here. So I'm just going to say else, And what I want to do basically is reprompt the user. So I'm just going to say rl.prompt.setPrompt. And setPrompt is basically going to take an argument of string and it's going to ask the user basically what you want to know. So I'm going to say to the user, incorrect response, please try again. And let's add a new line here. And now in order to use the prompt, I actually have to call it. So the first method is to set the prompt. The second method is going to be to call it. So I'm just going to say rl prompt. So now I'm just going to hit Control S to save. And now I'm just going to execute this. Node app. And it's going to say, what is 1 plus 5? And I'm going to say banana. And it's going to say incorrect response, please try again. Now I actually haven't told it what to do once the user inputs. So let's actually write the code for that now. And what I'm going to do is actually add a listener to our ReadLine interface. So I'm going to listen for the user's input, and the event for that is rl.onLine. And then we're going to pass it in a callback. Now this callback is going to have the user's input. And now we're going to decide what to do once we get the user's input. So obviously what we want to do is check if the user's input is correct. And if it is correct, we are going to close the application. And now what happens if it isn't correct? We're going to say else. And then I'm going to reset the prompt. So I'm just going to say rl.setPrompt. And I'm going to say, let's actually make this more informative. So I'm just going to say your answer of, and then we're just going to print out what they wrote. User input is incorrect. And we're going to do a /. And before that, I'm just going to say, try again. So now let's end that. And now remember, once we set the prompt, we actually have to call it. So now I'm just going to say rl.prompt. And now if we just take a look at what we have so far, this is basically going to give us a loop. So we set a line event listener. Now when the user enters input, that's going to trigger this line input. We're going to test to see if what he gave us is correct. And if it is, we're just going to close the application. And if we close the application, this onClose method is going to execute. It's going to say correct. So now let's see what happens if we give it the wrong value. It's going to execute the else statement. It's going to set the prompt. Your answer of so-and-so is wrong. And then it's going to prompt the user again. And basically, this line event is going to keep executing until the user enters the correct input. So let's actually take a look at this in action. So I'm just going to clear the terminal, and before I execute, let me just save. Control S to save. Oops. Control S to save. And now I'm just going to hit Node app. And it's going to say, what is 1 plus 4? And I'm going to say banana. Incorrect response. Please try again. I'm going to type banana again. Your answer of banana is not correct. And you can see that this will go on indefinitely. Now, if I go back up and let's actually see what it was. What is 1 plus 4? So I'm just going to type in 5. And you can see we get the output of correct, and then it exits the application. In this tutorial, we're going to be talking about the file system module. Now, what the file system module allows us to do is work with the file system And what I mean by that is that it allows us to create files, read files, delete files, create folders, stuff like that. So to get started, we're going to have to require the file module into our project. So I'm just going to say const fs is equal to require fs. So now that we have the file system module within our Node application, let's actually use it. Now, if I hit Control B, you can see that all I have is my app.js file within my Node.js tutorials folder. So let's actually create a file. So this one's going to create a file. And we're going to say fs.write file. Now, the first argument is going to be the name of the file. So I'm just going to say example.txt. The second argument is what you want to write to the file. So I'm just going to say this is an example. And the third argument is going to be a callback. And this callback is going to have a parameter of error in case anything goes wrong. So I'm just going to say error. And there we go. So let's actually finish writing this. So I could say if error. We're just going to print out the error. Otherwise, we can say file successfully created. So I'm just going to write file successfully created. So now if I was to save this and let's run this Node app, you can see that we get file successfully created. And now if I hit Control B, it's good not to be in the console when I do that. Control B now. You can see that we have a newly created file called example.txt. And if we look in it, we see the data that we wrote to the file. Now that we created this file, let's actually read it. Let's open it up and read it. So if I was to say Control B again, and I'm just going to go to app.js, and within this else statement, let's put all this code within here. And now I'm going to say fs.read file. And within here, the first argument, much like the write file method, is going to be the name of the file that you want to read. So I'm just going to say example.txt. The second argument is going to be the encoding type. Now I'm going to leave this blank because I want to show you guys what happens when you don't leave an encoding type. And then the third argument is going to take a callback function. And this callback function has two parameters. It has error and it has the file that you actually want to read. Now in here, I actually want to show you guys what the file looks like. So we're going to do the same thing that we did in the write file method. I'm going to check if there's any errors. And if there are no errors, I just want to print the file itself. So now if I was to save this, go to Node app. Now you see that the file was successfully created. And then you see that when we print out the file, we get this buffer stream. And then we get this bunch of numbers following it. Now, the buffer stream stores data in binary, okay? So what we need to do is specify the encoding type that we want it to be displayed as. So up here, we're going to go up here, and I'm just going to pass in UTF-8. So that's the encoding that I want. And now if I was to save this, go to Node app. You can see that file was successfully created and we're successfully reading the contents within the file. Alright, so now that we know how to create and read files, let's actually cover a few more methods. So what I want to do is start with a fresh example. So I'm just going to comment this all out. So I'm just going to highlight everything, Control \, and that's going to comment everything out for me. Now what I want to do is, let's say that when I created this example.txt file, that I really didn't mean to call it example.txt. Let's say I wanted to call it example2, for instance. Well, I could use the rename method. So I could do something like this. I can say fs.rename, and rename is going to take in 3 arguments. The first argument is going to be example.txt, and that's going to be the name of the file that we want to rename. The second argument is going to be what we want to rename the file to. So I'm just going to say example2.txt. And the third argument is going to be the callback function, which has a parameter called error. And we're going to do the same thing as we've been doing for all these asynchronous calls. We're just going to say if error. We're just going to print that out to the console. If there's no error and everything went fine, we're going to say successfully renamed the file. So I'm just going to say successfully renamed the file. So now if I hit Control S to save, and now let's run this. You can see successfully renamed the file, and it says deleted from this, and that's probably because it hasn't updated yet. So if I close this, and I'm just going to hit Control B, and you can see that within our package explorer that our file has been renamed to example2.txt, and if I open this, it's the same exact file that we created. A couple more methods that I want to go over, so I'm just going to hit Control B, and let's say that once I comment this out, let's say that when I was creating the file that I forgot to add something towards the end of the file. So what do you want to do? I want to append data to the file. So I'm just going to say fs.append file is going to take in 3 arguments. It's going to take in the name of the file. So I'm just going to say example2.txt. The second argument is going to be the data that you want to append to the file. So I'm just going to say some data being appended. And the third argument is going to be the callback function. And this is going to have an error as a parameter. Pass this in. And we're going to say if error, print it out to the console. Otherwise, we're going to print out that we successfully appended data to the file. So successfully appended data to file. So I'm just going to move this over so you can see. And now if I save this and execute this, so node app, you can see successfully appended data to the file. So let's actually take a look at our file. And you can see that our file has been changed. So before we had this as an example, and then we appended some data to the end of the file. And the last method that I want to cover within this tutorial is how do I delete a file. So for example, we did all this, and let's say that I've had enough with this file. I just want it gone. So let's just comment this out. And this is going to be the final method that I go over. So we're just going to say fs.unlink. And the first argument is obviously, you guys should get this by now. It's going to be example2. Example2.txt. And the second argument is going to be a callback function. It's going to have the parameter of error. And within here, if error, print it out to the console. If there's no error, we're just going to say successfully deleted the file. Successfully. So now if I was to save this and now execute it, you can see successfully deleted the file. It says up here, deleted from this. So if I close this, and if I was to hit Control B to bring up the Package Explorer, you can see that the file no longer exists. And this tutorial is going to be part 2 of my file system modules tutorial. Now, in the previous tutorial, we went over using the file system module to work with files. In this, I want to go over how to work with folders. So to get started, we're going to have to require the file system module. So I'm just going to say const fs equal require, and then fs here. All right, now what I want to do is I'm going to say fs.mkdir. And what mkdir stands for is make directory. And all a directory is a folder. So now here it's going to take in 2 arguments. One is going to be the folder name that you want. So I'm going to give it the value of tutorial. And then we're going to pass in the callback with an error. And we're just going to say if error console.log the error, else we successfully created the folder. So I'm just going to say console.log folder successfully created. So now if I was to save this, and now before I actually run this, I'm just going to hit Control B. So you don't see that there's any magic happening. So all I have is my Node.js tutorial folder and an app.js file. So now if I go here, type node app, you can see that we get the output of folder successfully created and that our tutorials folder has been created. Now let's say that I actually want to delete this folder. So I'm just going to hit Control B again. And this is actually going to give us an error, but I'm just going to show you what the error is. It's basically going to complain that this folder already exists. So I'm just going to say fs.rm, and rm stands for remove, and then dir, and that stands for remove folder. Now I'm going to give the folder name, so we called it tutorial. And this is also going to take a callback, which gets an error. So now if I say if error console.log the error, else we're going to say successfully deleted the folder. Successfully deleted the folder. So now if I was to save this and now execute it, you see that we get an error, file already exists, and that's because the tutorials folder already exists and we're trying to create another folder named the same thing. So I'm just going to hit Control B. We're going to delete the tutorial folder. So I'm just going to hit delete. Confirm that. Control B again. Let's execute this. And you can see that we successfully deleted the folder. So if I go up here, hit Control B, you can see that it doesn't exist. So first thing we do is we create a folder called tutorial. And then if this is successful, then we're going to delete the folder called tutorial. And you can see by the output that we successfully deleted the folder. Now this is too fast, and that's why you wouldn't be able to see it if we had the package manager open. So now that we know how to create and delete a folder, what I want to do now is create a folder and then create a file within that folder. So I'm just going to hit Control B. And we could leave this make directory. So we're going to make a folder called tutorial. And if it's successful, it's going to execute this else block. So let's remove this. And then within here, we're going to create our new file. So to do that, I'm just going to say fs.write file. Now write file is going to take in 3 arguments. It's going to take in the name of the file, but in this case, we got to give it the full path. So I'm going to say // and what // means is I want you to start relative to app.js. And then I want you to go inside the folder called tutorial. So I'm just going to hit Control B just to show you. So app.js starts here. There's going to be a folder called tutorial. So I'm going to go inside that folder, tutorial. And now I want you to create the file called example.txt. So if I hit Control B again, and then the second argument is going to be what the data that you want. So I'm just going to write 1, 2, 3. Doesn't matter for this example. And then the third argument is going to be a callback function, which gets an error. And then within here, I'm going to write if error, console.log the error onto the console. Else, we're going to write successfully created file. Successfully created file. So now let's save this. So I'm just going to hit Control S, go down here, Node app, and you can see that it says successfully created file down here. So now if I hit Control B, and I'm going to go up here and then hit Control B, you can see that we have our newly created tutorial folder. And within here, we have our example.txt. So if we go in here, you can see it has the data of 1, 2, and 3. Now what I want to show you is how would I delete a folder that has a file within it. So you might be saying, if I just go back here, hit Control B, that can't I just use fs.remove directory in order to do this? Well, I am actually just going to comment all this out. And what will end up happening if I use the remove directory function is that I'll get an error. And the reason for that is because if I use the remove directory function, it has to be used on a directory or folder that is empty. So just to illustrate this, just going to write this quick remove directory function. And if there's an error, print it. Else, we're just going to print deleted folder. So I'm just going to hit Control S to save. And I'm just going to type CLS to clear the terminal, node app. And you can see that we get an error, directory not empty, that we're trying to remove a directory that has a file within it. So in order to fix that, let's delete the file first. So I'm just going to say fs.unlink. And the first argument is going to be the file. So remember, /, and then we have to go into the tutorials folder. And then I named the file example.txt. Next argument is going to be a callback function, which has an error. And I'm just going to say if error, print it out. If there's no error, then what do I want to do? Well, if there's no error, that means that I successfully deleted the file, which means I can now successfully remove the file. So I'm just going to copy this. And I'm going to put this within the else block here. Add some semicolons. And now if I was to save this and now execute it, you can see that we have deleted folder, and you can see up here deleted from disk. So if I go hit Control B, you can see that the folder's been successfully deleted. So what did we do? First, we deleted the file that was within the folder. And then if that was successful, then I wanted to delete the folder itself. Last example that I want to do is what happens when there are multiple files within a folder and you want to delete all those files. So I'm going to cheat a little bit, and we're just going to create it within our package explorer. So I'm just going to say new folder, and we're going to call it example. And I'm just going to give it 2 files. So I'm just going to say a.txt, and the second file is going to be b.txt. All right, so now I have my folder and I have my two files. So how would I go about doing this? Well, there's a method called read directory, and what read directory does is it gives you back the list of files that you have within that folder. So let's actually call it. So I'm just gonna comment all this out. Comment this out, and then I'm just gonna type fs.read directory. Now the first argument is going to be obviously the name of the directory, and in this case we called it example. And then the second argument is going to be a callback function. First parameter is going to be error, and then second parameter is going to have files. Now files is going to be an array with the name of the file. So now we can test if there's an error. All we're going to do is print out the error. There's no error. We're going to print out files. And I'm just going to print out files just to show you what files contains. So if I save this, run this in the console, you can see that we have our two files stored within an array, a.txt and b.txt. So now let's actually loop through this array and delete everything. So now I'm just going to say for let file of files. And then within here, we can start deleting each file individually. So I could say fs.unlink, and then we're going to give it the file name. So it's going to be ./example. Then it's going to be the name of the file. After that is going to take in an argument callback with an error. And if there was a problem deleting that file, it's going to print it out to the console. If there wasn't, we're just going to say successfully deleted file so-and-so. So successfully deleted file. So now if I was to save this and now execute this, you can see successfully deleted file once, twice. And if I hit Control B, you can see that we have an empty folder called example. In this tutorial, we're going to be talking about the readable and writable streams. Now, what these streams allow us to do is basically be able to read and write data more efficiently. And the way that they accomplish this is by reading and writing data in chunks as opposed to reading and writing the data all at once. So to get started, we're going to have to require the fs module or the file system module. So I'm just going to say const fs is equal to require fs. Now that we have our file system module included, we're going to create a readable stream. And there's a method called fs.createReadStream. And now I need to give it the path. So if I just hit Control B, you can see that I have an example.txt file here, and it has a bunch of text that we're going to be reading in. So if I head back to app.js, hit Control B again, we're just going to give it the path of ./example.txt, and then that's it. Now this is going to return to us a readable stream. So I'm just going to save it within a variable. So I'm just going to say const readStream is equal to fs.readStream. And then here, what we can do is listen for an event. Now the readStream object inherits from the EventEmitter class. So that means we could listen for events to occur. And one event that we want to listen for is the data event. So I'm just going to say readStream.on data. And then this is going to take a callback function. And now we're going to get a chunk of data in return. So every time we read a piece of data, this event data is going to be invoked. So this callback function is going to be called every time we get a piece of data. So now I'm just going to print out the data onto the console. And you're going to see why I call it a chunk and not the full file in a second. So now if I save this, go to Node, App, and you can see that we read this data within 2 chunks. So we have 2 printouts here. We have a buffer here and a buffer here. So let's actually set the encoding type so it's a lot easier to what the source is. And we're just going to set it to UTF-8 and save this. And now let's rerun this application. And there you go. You see that we read our text file. So what are the benefits of reading this in a chunk as opposed to loading the whole file? Well, for one, when I get this chunk, I could immediately start manipulating that chunk. So I don't have to wait for the whole file to load in order to manipulate it. Or let's say that I don't want to manipulate this chunk of data that I got already. I want to send it to a new file. Well, I could start sending that data to a new file while I'm reading in the data itself. So let's actually send it to a new file. And for that, we're going to have to create a writable stream. So I'm just going to go here and I'm going to say const write stream is equal to fs.create write stream. And within here is going to be the name of the file that I want to write to. So I'm just going to call it example2.txt. And now within here, what I can do is, instead of waiting to get the whole data, I could start writing chunks to the new file. So within here, instead of just printing out console.log chunk, I can say write stream.write. And I could write this data to a new file as I'm reading it in. So I could say chunk here, and let's save that. And now if I run this application, Node app. So now if I hit Control B, you're gonna see our newly created file. And if I go here, you can see that we wrote onto a new file. So basically what's happening here is I'm able to write chunk by chunk, in our example 2 chunks, in order to get the full file, but I'm able to start writing before the file is fully loaded. And that's pretty much the power of using a stream. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you guys why you should be using streams by trying to read a very, very large text file. So to get started, I'm just going to show you how big the file is. So I'm just going to hit Control B. We have our large file.txt file here. And if I click Review in Explorer, right click, Properties, you can see that the size, it's about 2.7 gigs. So let's actually take a look at what would happen if we were to use the read file method from the file system module. So now if I was to execute this and type node app, you see that we get an error, and the error says file size is greater than the possible buffer. Now what does that mean? Well, the read file uses a buffer, but it uses a full buffer. Now what that means is that I need at least 2.7 gigs in memory in order to load this file, because this file has to be loaded, because this file has to fit within the buffer. And it's saying, hey, your buffer size is just too small for this file. Now I'm just going to comment this out. And now what we're going to use is a readable stream. So I'm just going to comment this out. And then we're going to uncomment this. And by the way, I have tutorials on both readable streams and using the read file method. So now I have this stream, but look what happens when I execute the code now. So if I was to save this and now execute it, you can see that our readable stream has absolutely no problem reading this file. So I'm just going to hit Control C to cancel this. because I don't want it to finish, loading the entire thing. But why can this be accomplished with streams but not using this read file method? Well, one, a stream uses a buffer also, but it doesn't use a full buffer. It uses a very, very small buffer. And what that allows us to do is basically what's happening is that you're ending up reading the file in chunks. You're not reading the entire file at once. So basically, every time a data event occurs, I am getting a chunk of the file. I'm not attempting to read the entire file at once. And therefore, the buffer size could be a lot smaller, as opposed to the read file method, which uses a full buffer, which needs to be big enough to load the entire file at once and then serve it. Streams allow for a smaller buffer size, which is memory efficient, and for data to be read and written in chunks. In this tutorial, we're going to be going over pipes. Now, what a pipe allows us to do is basically take a source stream, which is just a readable stream, and send it over to its destination, which is just a writable stream. So in the last tutorial, we went over readable streams and writable streams. And basically what we did was create a read stream. And then from there, we created a write stream. And then we attached an event listener to the read stream. And every time we got a data event emitted, we read a piece of the chunk from the read stream. And then we wrote out that chunk to where we wanted to send it. So there's actually a much more simpler way. And the much more simpler way is just to get rid of this. And all we're going to do is say read stream dot pipe. Now pipe is going to take what read stream gives us and is going to pipe it into our write stream. So now if I was to bring up the terminal and just type node app and hit Control B, you can see we have our example text, and then we created our example 2.txt. So the pipe method is basically a shorthand version for all of that stuff that we wrote in the last tutorial. So all we need to remember is, in order to use a pipe, we need two streams. We need a source stream, and we also need a destination stream. In our case, the read stream is our source. This is the file that we want to read in. Then we call the pipe method on the read stream. And then this is going to take the destination. Where do we want to send this data to? And that's to the write stream. So now I want to talk about pipe chaining. So let's give a more complicated example. And for that, I'm going to bring in another module. And I'm going to bring in const zlib. Now, zlib is a module that is for basically compressing files. So I'm just going to say require zlib. Now what we're going to do is create a transform stream. Now, what a transform stream is basically is what it does is it takes the input, so for example from our read stream, and then when it receives that data, it manipulates that data into something else. In this case, what it's going to do is compress the data. So I'm just going to create a transform stream. So I'm just going to say const gzip is equal to zlib dot create gzip. I'll call that method. Now this is going to return our transform stream. And now within here, instead of saying read stream, what I can do is send that data that read stream is giving us, and I could pipe it into our gzip. Now what gzip is going to do is take the chunks of data that is reading at a time, and it's going to manipulate it and compress it basically. So you're going to get a compressed version of the read stream. And then from here, we're going to pipe it out to our destination, which is our write stream. So now if I was to run this, let's save it. Now I'm just going to hit Control B. And if we go here to example 2.txt, you can see that we accidentally did not change the type, and that's my fault. So the type that we're creating, create write stream, should not be a txt file. It should be a .gz file, and that's the compression type. So I'm just going to save this, and let's run this application again. Now I'm going to hit Control B, and you can see that we get an example2.txt.gz file. Now if I click it, it's going to say that Visual Studio Code cannot open this. So I'm just going to right click it, reveal in Explorer, and you can see that it's a zipped file. It's basically a compressed file. And I'm going to double click it, and you can see that our example2.txt file is here, and with our text. So now let's give just one more example just to get the hang of it, of chaining pipes and using a transform stream. So we saw what happens when we compress the file and then write it. So let's go in reverse. We're going to take our source, which is compressed, we're going to uncompress it, and then we're going to write it. So from here, let's just go back to Visual Studio Code. Let's go back to app.js, Control B. And instead of saying create gzip, what we want to do is create unzip. So I'm just going to go here and say create g unzip. And we're going to change this variable to unzip. And now this is going to be our transform stream. So I'm just going to copy this, paste it here. And now what happened? Well, read stream is changed, right? So now I want the compressed version of it. So let's go over here. We're going to get rid of the encoding type. The compressed file is called example2.txtgz. So I'm just going to copy this. I'm going to paste this in here. Now this input, this read stream, is going to be piped to g unzip, which is going to basically uncompress the file, and then it's going to send it off to our destination. So what do we want our destination to be called? And we could pretty much name this anything we want. So I'm just going to say uncompressed.txt. So now if I was to go ahead and save this, type node app, execute it, we hit Control B, and you can see that we have our uncompressed txt file. So if I click this, you can see our example text is here and that it is successfully uncompressed. In this tutorial, we're going to go over the HTTP module. Now, what the HTTP module allows us to do is basically create a web server with Node.js. So to get started, we're going to have to require the HTTP module. So I'm just going to say const HTTP is equal to require HTTP. Now from here, we can call a method called create server. And this is going to give us a HTTP server object. So I'm just going to say const server is equal to http.create server. Now this method is going to take a callback, and this callback is going to give us a request object as well as a response object. So let's just do that. Now the request object is what the client requests from us. So for example, if I am on Google Chrome and I type in www.google.com, I am requesting something from Google. Now Google server is going to take that request and it's going to send me a response back. So the most simplistic example that I could give you is I could send a basic text back to the client. So I could say res, and that's going to be my response. I'm going to say write, and I'm just going to pass in a string. So I'm just going to say hello world from Node.js. Now within here, I haven't actually sent the response back. I just told it what it is. So in order to send the response, I'm going to say res.end. Now this is going to take care of our http.createServer method. Now there's one more thing that we have to do to get this server up and running. And that's to tell Node.js what port that I want to listen for request at. So I'm just going to say server.listen, and we're going to listen on port 3000. So now if I was to save this, and now go down here, type node app, you can see that our server is up and running. Now I'm going to go to Chrome. And within here, I'm going to type localhost : and then the port which we assigned was 3000. So that's where we're listening for request at. And if I hit enter, you can see that we get a response back from the server, hello world from Node.js. So now from here, what we can do is actually listen to requests, different routes. So let's actually take a look at a property of the request object. And one of the properties is called URL. So instead of just saying hello world from Node.js, I only want to say hello world from Node.js if it is the root domain. So I'm just going to say request.url is equal to /. Then I'm going to say res.write hello world from Node.js. And then don't forget that we have to send the response back to the client. So we're going to call res.end. And now if I was to save this, and we're just going to hit Control-C to kick us out of the server. And then we're going to start the server back up again so we get our updated changes. We're going to go back to Chrome, hit enter, and you can see that it works exactly the same. If we were to add an else statement here, so let's say they are not using the root domain, I could say res.write using some other domain, and then we're going to send that out to the user. And let's actually Control-C this to stop the server. And before we start up the server, I have to save. So I'm just going to say Control-S to save. Node app. And now here, instead of localhost : 3000, I'm going to say localhost banana. And let's see what response we get. And the response we get back is using some other domain. Now this response is going to be for anything we type because we put it in the else block. So if I type that, I'm going to get the same response. And then if I go back and just have the /, you can see that we get the hello world from Node.js output. In this tutorial, we're going to be going over how we can serve static files using the HTTP and file system module. So to get started, I'm just going to hit Control-B to bring up the Package Explorer. And you can see that we have a static folder and we have 3 static files. Now these files is a JSON file, an image, a PNG file, and an index.html file. So what I want to do is make a request to the server and have the server send these files back to me. So I'm just going to hit Control-B to get rid of that. And the first thing we're going to do is actually require the modules. So I'm just going to say const http equal require http. And then our second module is going to be the file system module. So I'm just going to say require fs. Now the first step to do this is to actually create the server. So I'm just going to say http.create server. And this is going to take a callback, and we're going to have a request object and a response object. Now I'm going to call a method on that server object. So I'm just going to say .listen, and we're going to listen on port 3000. Now let's say that I want to read in a HTML file, for instance. So let's go up here, and what I can do is create a readable stream. So I'm just going to say const read stream is going to be equal to fs.create read stream. And then within here, we're going to pass in the path. So I'm going to say ./ because it's going to be relative to app.js. Now I need to go inside the static folder. And then the name of the file that I want to read in is called index.html. Now what I want to do is actually write a header for my response. Now what a header is responsible for is to let the client know what kind of data that I am expecting. So I'm just going to say res.write head. And then within here, we're going to pass in the HTTP status code. So I'm going to pass in 200. Now 200 means that everything went okay with your request. And then the second argument is going to be what the content type is. So I'm just going to hit content type. And then we're going to pass in text/HTML. All right, so now that we've written our header, I'm just going to take you guys to Google Chrome real quick just to look up the status codes. Now you can see that HTTP 200 means that the request has been successfully completed. So whatever the user requested from the server, that means everything went fine, as I said. And there's a bunch of HTTP status codes. So let's look at another one. So another common one is 404. So you're going on a website and you accidentally mistype the URL and they give you a not found error. So that would be a 404 error. Now let's go back to our Visual Studio Code and let's complete this. So I'm just going to go down here. And within here, I'm just going to pipe the read stream into where I want to send it. So I'm just going to say read stream.pipe. And where do I want to send this file? I want to send it to the user. So I'm going to pass in res. Now res, the response object, is also a writable stream. So I'm piping it to the response object. So now I'm just going to save this. Let's go back to Chrome. I'm going to go here to Google and I'm going to type localhost 3000. And it should probably be noted that you should start up your Node applications. I'm just going to type Node app. Now let's go back to Google Chrome, hit refresh. And you can see that our HTML file has been successfully sent. So let's actually try to send the other static files. And this is pretty much straightforward. So all we have is, if I hit Control B, is an image and a JSON file. So I'm just going to hit Control B again. Now all we need to do is obviously change the file that we're reading in. So instead of index.html, let's do example.json. Now the content type is obviously not a text/HTML file. So we're going to have to pass in application/JSON. And now if I was to save this, hit Control C. So we're going to restart the server. I'm just going to clear out the terminal, Node app. Now let's hit refresh. And you can see that our JSON file gets loaded and sent to the client. Now let's load up that image. So now the same exact thing. I'm just going to hit Control B because I forgot what I named the image. I named it example.png. So I'm just going to change this to PNG. And instead of application.json, we're just going to remove this. And we're just going to go here and type image/png. So now if I was to save this, now we got to restart the server, Control C to cancel that out. Node app. Now if I go to Chrome, hit refresh, you can see that my image has been loaded. So that's basically the ins and outs of how you would serve a static file using the HTTP module as well as the file system module. In this tutorial, we're going to be going over how we can create our package.json file. Now, what the package.json file is responsible for is basically holding all our metadata for our project. Metadata being the name of the project, the version number, etc. So to get started, what we're going to use is called the Node Package Manager. So I'm just going to type npm. And then I'm going to type init, which means initialize. I hit enter. And you can see that we get a bunch of jargon. So what do we want to name the package? By default, it's going to be called the name of the folder that you're currently in. So up here, you can see Nodejs _tutorial. And it says the default will be Nodejs/tutorial. So I could just hit enter. That's fine with me. The version number 1.0.0, that's okay. Description, so what is this package about? What is your project about? And we're just gonna say tutorial because that's all we're using it for. And then the entry point is pretty important and it lets us know which file should be used to start our Node application. So for example, if I was making a website and I upload it to a server, it will let the server know that that was our entry point to our application. Test command, let's ignore that for now. Hit enter. Git repository is pretty self-explanatory. It's going to be your git URL. Hit enter. Keywords, we're going to leave that blank as well. Author, go ahead and write down your name. License ISC is fine by me. Then it's going to say, is this okay? And we're just going to say, yeah, that's fine. So you might think that nothing has happened, but if I hit Control B, you can see that we have our package.json file created. And if I take a look at this, open it up, you can see that package.json is just a JSON file and it has our configuration settings. So the name, the version, description of our application, the entry point, scripts, author, and license. And basically in the next tutorial, what we're going to end up doing is actually going out and installing external packages and including them within our own project. In this tutorial, we're going to be going over the Node Package Manager in order to install packages. Now, all a package is basically reusable code that we can include within our own application. It's a folder with one or more modules within it. So to get started, we're actually going to head over to Chrome real quick. And there's actually a website called npmjs.com. Now, npmjs.com is where we can actually look and discover new packages that we can include within our application. So I'm just going to pick out a package and we're going to install it and then use it. So I'm just going to scroll down and you could use the search up here, or let's just pick a popular package so you can see packages that a lot of people are installing. And scroll down more and let's pick Nodejs. And then here we're given a bunch of instructions. So it says in order to install this package, I just have to type in this command, npm I. I is shorthand for install and then the name of the package. So in this case, the package's name is Nodejs. So if I head back to Visual Studio Code and I type npm install Nodejs, you can see that it goes out and it downloads the package for me automatically. And now if I head back to my package.json file, the JSON file that we created in the previous tutorial, you'll notice that we have an extra property, and within this property is called dependencies, and then it gives us the name of the package we installed as well as the package version that we installed. So now if I was just to hit Control B, you would see that we have an extra folder, and this extra folder is called Node Modules. So if I open this up, you can see that our Node.js installation is stored here within this folder. So now this is all fine and dandy, but how would I now use Node.js within my own personal project? So I'm just going to hit Control B, and we're going to close out our package.json file. We're going to go to app.js, and basically what we're going to do is require it. So I'm just going to say const underscore is equal to require Node.js. And now from here, let's actually use it to prove that this is working. So I'm just going to say underscore dot fill, and fill is basically going to take an array. So I'm just going to pass in an array 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the second argument is going to take in a value. What do you want to replace these numbers with? So I'm just going to say banana. And the third argument is going to be the start index. So what I want to do is start at index 1. And the last argument is going to be the end index. And since we have 5 elements within our array, the last index would be 4. So let's actually store this within a variable. So I'm just going to say let example is equal to that. And we're just going to print out this onto the console. So I'm just going to hit Control S to save. We're going to go to Node app. And you can see that we required Node.js into our application. And we've tested that one of the methods within Node.js is actually working. So we get a new array, and we filled in index 1 to 3 with the value of banana. And let's say that for whatever instance that you installed the wrong module, or you want to get rid of a module. So if I hit Control B, and we're just going to bring up the package.json file. I'm going to hit Control B again. What I can do is I could say npm uninstall and then the package name, which is going to be Node.js. And you can see that Node.js is removed from our dependencies. And if I hit Control B, you can see that our node underscore modules folder no longer exists. And that's because we have no dependencies that our application is using currently. In this tutorial, we're going to be talking about semantic versioning. Now, what semantic versioning is basically just a standard that a lot of Node.js packages follow. It allows for us to know what kind of changes have occurred in the updated version of the package. So to get started, you can see that I have my package.json file open, and I have a dependency installed called Nodejs. Now within here, you see the version of the package that I installed with the caret sign. And we'll talk about the caret sign within this tutorial as well. But for now, I want you to focus on these 3 numbers. The first number 4 is going to represent the major version of this package. The second number is going to represent the minor version. And the third number is going to represent the patch version. Now, the major, minor, and patch numbers all have different meanings. So, for example, right now, the latest version is 4.17.11. If I wake up tomorrow and Node.js is updated, and it says the latest version is 4.17.12, that means that that was a patch update. Now, all a patch update means is that they implemented some bug fixes. Now, likewise, same thing happens. I go to sleep, they update Node.js tomorrow, and instead of 4.17.11, it's 4.18.11. So that means that there was a minor update. Now, what a minor update does is it adds new functionality, and it might deprecate some of the old functionality, but you can still use it. So it's a non-breaking change update. And finally, if I was to go to sleep tomorrow and wake up, new version of Node.js is updated, and this time we get version 5.0.0. So what does that mean? That means that there was a major update pushed out to Lodash. And what a major update indicates is that there was a breaking change. So that means version 5.0.0 is not compatible with the code 4.17.11 or any version of 4. So now let's talk about this caret character. And this caret character was put there automatically when we typed npm install Lodash. Now what this caret character symbolizes the following. So the following rules, if you will. So this means that whenever I use the caret character, that I do not want you to make any major updates. So that means right now I'm on version 4 as the major, but if there is a minor update or a patch update, go ahead and download those new packages. Now, there's another symbol called the tilde symbol, and the tilde symbol is right next to the number 1 on your keypad. And that means that you want the following to occur. That means you only want patch updates. So let's say I'm on 4.17 right now. That means I only want you to change the last number. So for example, if 4.18 comes out, this tilde symbol will say, hey, do not update to that package. And last but not least, let's say that you don't want the tilde or the caret sign up here. So for example, you don't want the caret sign to update the minor or the patch, and you don't want the tilde to just update the patch. What you can do is remove the caret or the tilde sign, and this guarantees that the only version of Lodash that you will ever have within your package will be 4.17.11. In this tutorial, we're going to set up our first Express server. Now, all Express is basically a web framework for Node.js. So in the previous tutorials, we used the HTTP and file system module in order to serve static files. With Express, however, you can see that we can accomplish that and much more with much less code. So to get started, I'm just going to go over to Chrome. And here is Express.js's official website. So you can see up here that they have guides for you. You could reference the API. And basically, this is just a documentation for Express. And you can see that they give install instructions here. Now, if you didn't go to the official website, or you didn't know that they had an official website, you probably would have went to npmjs.com. The Express is a publicly available package for you to download and install, and you would have just typed Express within the search bar here. So I'm just going to head back to Visual Studio Code. And the first thing that we need to do is actually create our package.json. So I'm just going to say npm init, and I'm going to pass in the flag yes. Now, when you pass in the flag yes, you basically skip all these configuration questions that they ask you when you type npm init. So now that we have our package.json, we can actually install Express itself. So I'm just going to type npm install Express. You can see that it's downloading right now. And now from here, let's actually require Express.js into our project. So I'm just going to say const express is equal to require express. Now, when I require this module, this express module, what I'm getting back is a function. So I'm just going to call that function. So I'm just going to say express. And this function is going to return an object. And this object is going to have a bunch of methods that we can use within our application. So let's store this object within a variable. And by convention, we would call that variable app. So I'm just going to say app is equal to express. Now from here, what I can do is call a method called get. Now the first argument of get is going to take the route. So we're just going to say /. And then the second argument is going to be the callback function, and it's going to be request and response. And then all we're going to do is say res.send hello world. So this is going to be our first application using Express. So when the user visits the route / what we're going to do is send a response of hello world. And that with a semicolon. And then the last step that we need to do is actually give it a port to listen to. So I'm just going to say app.listen. And we're just going to listen on port 3000. So now if I was to save this, type node app, and that's going to run the server. Head over to Chrome. Then I'm just going to open a new tab, and I'm just going to type localhost 3000. And there you go. This is our first Express.js application, and you can see that we got a response of hello world. And in the upcoming tutorials, we're going to dive deeper into the Express web framework. In this tutorial, we're going to work more with the HTTP GET request, and we're going to be talking about query string and route parameters. So to get started, we created a basic Express application from the previous tutorial, and we gave it one route, which is basically the index route, or you could refer to it as the home page. And we just said hello world. So if I was just to run this, node app, go to Chrome, go to localhost, and we're going to put 3000 because that's the port. And you see our basic route. So this is the / route. So now let's give it another route. So I'm just going to go here. I'm just going to say app.get. And we're going to give it another route. And I'm just going to say example. And within here, we're going to pass in a callback. And now we're just going to say res.send hitting example route. So now if I save this, I'm just going to hit Control-C to kick us out. We're going to restart the server so that it starts with our newly saved file. Head over to Chrome, hit refresh. You see that our index page is still working. And if I go here and type example, you can see that we created another route and that it's hitting the example route now as opposed to the index route. So now let's go back here. This is all fine and dandy. Now I want to talk about query strings and route parameters. So I want to start off with route parameters. And we're going to create another route. So I'm just going to say app.get. And I'm going to say example. And within here, I'm going to give it these colons, and I'm just going to say name, and that's going to be the name of that route. And I'm just going to say age. And then the same exact thing. So I'm just going to pass in a callback. Don't forget to add that. And then this time, what I want to do is access from the request object. And I'm just going to say params. And what we want to do is actually print this out onto the console to see what we get. And the idea is that I want to get the value of name and age. So we're just going to say res.send, and we're just going to say hitting, actually let's say example with route params. So we're just going to save this, hit Control-C. I'm just going to say CLS, node app. Head over to Chrome. We're going to hit refresh. So our example is working. But now we're going to pass information in. So I'm just going to pass in name. So Pedro. And then age, I'm going to put 99. So I'm going to hit enter. And you can see example with route params has been executed. So now if I take a look back at Visual Studio Code, you can see that when we hit this route here and we print out what's within our request.params, we get an object. And this object contains the properties name and age and the values of Pedro and 99. So let's give a more detailed example. Instead of just giving a generic answer, I'm just going to send the user back his name. So I say name plus here, I'm just going to say age. And don't forget that this name property and age is within our request.params, and all request.params is an object. So I could say request.params.name to access the name value, and I could say request.params.age to access the age property. So now if I save this, and we're going to reset the server, CLS to clear the terminal, Node app, head over to Chrome, hit refresh, and you can see that we're sending back to the user Pedro and 99, and that we get the same output because we're still printing it. So that's how we would get data from the user using route parameters. But there's also another type of data that you can send back, and that's called query string parameters. So what is that? Well, if I go back here, and actually let me just type this out. I'm going to say console.log, and again we're going to use the request object because the request object is basically what the client is sending us. So I'm just going to say request.query, and here in Google Chrome, let's actually cancel this server. I'm going to save this file, restart the server, head over to Chrome, just going to go up here, hit refresh, go back to Visual Studio Code, and you can see that we get an empty object. Now this empty object is going to be our request.query, so it's just a query string parameter. And the reason it's an empty object is because we haven't actually passed anything into it. So in order to do that, I'm just going to go up here. We're going to use a question mark, and then it's going to be the name of the property that you want. So I'm just going to make it up right now. I'm going to give it a name of tutorial, and then followed by an equal sign, and then the value you want to assign it. So I'm just going to say params tutorial. And now if I hit enter here, you can see that's pretty much the same thing that's happening. But if I go back to Visual Studio Code, you can see that our request query object is no longer empty. We have a property of tutorial, and we have params tutorial as a value. So now let's say that I want to pass more than just the tutorial. So how would I pass multiple query string parameters? And if we head back to Chrome, all we have to do is remember to start off with a question mark, the name of the query string, and then the value. So if you want to pass in a second query string, what you can do is use the and sign or the ampersand, whatever you want to call it. And I'm just going to give it sort, and then I'm just going to say equal, and I'm going to give it the value of by age. And if I hit enter, head over to Visual Studio Code, and you can see now that when we print out our query string, you can see that we get an object that has tutorial, and it also has the property of sort. So now you might be asking yourselves, when should I use a route parameter versus a query string parameter? You should use route parameters when you must have that data. So for example, let's say name was an absolute must. I cannot have a blank name, and I cannot have a blank age. So I would use a route parameter. And let's say that I want to give some optional settings. In that case, I would use a query string parameter. So, for example, when we passed in sort, we could be sorting the data by age, and that would be an optional setting. But I would need the name and the age to begin with, so I would use a route parameter for that. And if the user wants to sort the data, then I would use a query string parameter for that. In this tutorial, we're going to be talking about serving static files using Express. Now, what do I mean by a static file? I mean your HTML files, CSS, client-side JavaScript, images, videos, stuff like that. So to get started, we're just going to require a path module, and it's basically a utility module that deals with paths, just to make our lives a little bit easier. And within here, if I go down here, I can say app.use. Now use, whenever you see app.use, it means that I'm using middleware. The first argument is going to be the alias for our static folder. So for example, if I was to hit Control B, you can see that I have a static folder here. And what I want to do is give this static folder an alias. I don't want people outside of my server to know that this folder is called static. But let's take a look inside of it. We have an index.html, we have example.js, and we have a main.css file just for an example. So now if I close that, Control B, I'm going to call it public. That's going to be the alias for my static folder. The second argument is going to be a middleware function. So I'm going to use a convenience method that Express provides us. So I could say express.static, and then I'm going to say path.join. And I'm going to say dir name, which stands for directory name. Now, dir name is a string, and this is going to give us where app.js is. So if we take a look by pressing Control B, it's going to give us where app.js is located. Now I want to go inside to the static folder because this is where all my static assets are. So if I hit Control B again, we'll pass in as a second argument the name of the folder, static. So I'm just going to end this. Put a colon there. Says there's some error and I'm missing a parentheses. So now here, instead of just saying hello world, let's actually send a file. So I'm just going to remove this. Say res.send file. And we're going to use our path module again to make things easier. I'm going to say path.join. We're going to give it the directory name that we're currently in. We're going to go inside the static folder. And then I want to serve the HTML file. So the HTML file is called index.html. So now if I was to save this, go down here, type node app. Let's go over to Chrome. Now we're going to go up here, type localhost 3000. And there you go. You can see our static HTML file has been served. If I type F12, let's take a look at the source real quick. If I can actually see it. And you can see within our HTML file that we're using public. Now remember, we don't actually have a folder called public. We have a folder called static. But to the client side, it's called public. And this main.css file. Now this main.css file is working because you can see that our h1 tag is red. And now if we go back down here, you can see public, JS, and our example.js. And if I go to console, you can see that I printed out onto the console testing client side. So that's basically the basics of serving static files using Express. Now you can use this to use images and videos, and it'll be the same exact process. And in this tutorial, we're going to be talking about handling an HTTP post request using Express. Now, an HTTP post request is typically used when working with forms. So I have my form set up right here. I have an email address field and a password field. And if I was to hit submit, that would be an example of a post request. Now, obviously, we're getting an error from Node. Cannot post to this route. That's because we haven't actually coded anything yet. So if we take a look at Visual Studio Code, you can see our form that I set up. Action is going to be the route that we're going to code. So I just put /. The HTTP method is going to be a post method. Here we see that we have our email field and our password field and our button of type submit. So now I'm just going to head over to app.js, and I actually want to code the app.post method. So if we take a look at our application as it sits currently, all I have is an app.get. This is the route, and all I'm doing is serving the HTML file to the user. So in order to remedy this, we're going to use a module that's going to parse the form data for us. And that module is called the Body Parser Module. And that module is called the Body Parser Module. So to get started, we're actually going to have to install this module. So I'm just going to come down here, cancel our server. I'm going to say npm install body parser. So let that install. And now from here, what we're going to do is require it into our application. So I'm just going to say const body parser is equal to require body parser. And now from here, what we're going to do is use middleware. So every time we use middleware, we're going to call app.use. So here, I'm just going to say app.use. Then I'm going to say body parser .url encoded. And then within here, we're going to pass in an option called extended. And we're going to set that to false. So end that with a semicolon. And all this is doing is allowing us to parse URL encoded forms. It parses the data for us and attaches it to the request body. The extended option is set to false because we aren't dealing with any complicated objects. All we want is an email and password, which are both strings. So now that we have that set up, let's actually code our app.post HTTP request. So we have our get here. And now I'm just going to go down here, and instead of saying app.get, I'm going to say app.post. The first argument is going to be the route. And as you saw in the HTML file, the action route is the /. The second argument is going to be a callback function with the request and res object. And now from here, remember what the body parser does. It parses the data for us and it attaches it to the body of the request object. So now what I can do here is I can say console.log request.body, and this is going to give us an object with the properties of email and password. And now from here, usually when you post something to the server, you usually use whatever the user inputted and you do some database work. So I'm just going to say database work here. And once that database work is done, you will send a response to the user. So I'm just going to say res.send successfully posted data. Now I'm just going to hit Control S to save. Go down here. I'm going to type node app, start up my server. Let's head over to Chrome. And now if I hit refresh, just to reload it, let's type some random email, random password, hit submit. So now what happened here was I filled in my email and password. I posted to the server. I got a response back from the server saying everything was posted successfully. So if I go back to Visual Studio Code, you can see that our console.log is working. We're printing out the request.body, and you can see that our form data has been successfully parsed. So if we take a look down here onto the console, you'll see that we have an object with the property email and its value, and you also have property of password and its value. So that's pretty much how you would make an HTTP post request using Express and the Body Parser module. In this tutorial, we're going to be talking about how we can handle JSON data using Express and the Body Parser module. So in the previous tutorial, we talked about using the Body Parser module in order to handle URL encoded data. So what we're going to do is take this form from the last tutorial and convert it to post JSON data. So to get started, I'm just going to head over to Visual Studio Code. And right here, I have my index.html file and our form pulled up. What I'm going to do is add an attribute to the form. So I'm just going to give it an ID and I'm going to call it form. And the reason for that is I want to prevent the default submission. I want to post data using jQuery Ajax. So that's how we're going to post JSON data to our server. So now that I have my ID, scroll down, and I already put our jQuery CDN here just to make the tutorial a little bit quicker. And we're just going to go here and we're going to include our script. So I'm just going to say script. Now from here, we're just going to say document.ready. And the first thing that we want to do is get our form. So I'll just say $, form. And we're going to attach a submit handler to our form. And this submit handler is going to take a callback function, which has an event as a parameter. So now what I want to do is prevent the default submit. So we're just going to take the event that we get, and we're going to call prevent default. And from here, we're going to use Ajax to actually make the post request. And what we're going to do is post JSON data back to the server. So I'm just going to say $.ajax. And this is going to take a bunch of configuration. So one of the properties that we can use is called URL. And this is going to be the endpoint that we're going to have at our server. So I'm just going to say /. Second property is going to be type. And this is going to be what kind of HTTP request that we want to make. And we're going to post JSON to the server. So I'm just going to say post. Third argument is going to be the content type. And the content type is obviously going to be JSON. So I'm just going to say application/JSON. Next property that we're going to use is called data. And this is going to be the actual form data that we want to pass in. So how do we get the form data? Well, I'm just going to say get our form. And then I'm going to serialize it using the serialize array. And basically this is going to take our form data, so our email field and our password field, serialize it within an array, and this is going to be a JavaScript array object. But remember, we're posting JSON back to the server because that's the content type that we want. So we're just going to say JSON.stringify and pass in this data as an argument. So this is going to take the serialized array and is going to convert it into JSON for us. Next, we're going to say success. And success is going to be invoked when we have successful response back from the server. So I'm just going to say response. And we're just going to print onto the console successfully got response. And we're also going to print out the response that we actually got from the server. So once all this is done, let's scroll down a bit. Everything looks good to me. So I'm just going to save our index.html file. We're going to head back to app.js. So this is our server. And down here, remember that we told our Express application how to handle URL encoded data. Now what we need to do is just say app.use body parser, and this has a method called JSON. Now this method is obviously going to parse JSON, and it's going to attach it to our request.body. So now if I just put a semicolon there, and if we scroll back down, you can see our original post request is handled here. And what I'm going to do is, instead of saying just plain text, we're going to respond back to the client using JSON. So I'm just going to say res.json, and we're going to pass an object, and we're just going to say that it's been successfully posted. So now obviously what res.json does is takes a JavaScript object and converts it into JSON for us. So now if I was to save this, and I'm just going to go to terminal, new terminal, and I'm going to say node app to run the server. Go back to Chrome. We're going to type localhost. And now to test this out, let's give it a dummy email and password. Click submit. And now if I hit F12, you can see form serial array is not a function. So let's take a look at this. And we're getting an error. Let's actually take a look at that part of the code. And that's because we did not include the $sign. So let's include that now. Let's save it. Go over to Chrome. Now we're going to hit refresh and type whatever we want. Hit submit. Go to console. And you can see that we successfully posted JSON to the server. The server responded by posting this object back to us. If I go back to Visual Studio Code, you can see that we have our serialized form data. You can see that we have our serialized form data and that it's not JSON, that this is just an array. And the reason why you're not getting back JSON, and it's because our Body Parser module sees that it's JSON and automatically converts it to a JavaScript object. In this case, it's an array. And in this tutorial, we're going to be talking about validating user input using Joy. So what we're going to do is validate the data coming in from this form. Now, the reason you would validate user input server side is because you can never trust the data that you're receiving from the user. So to get started, let's actually head over to Visual Studio Code. And I'm just going to cancel out our server. And I'm going to type npm install Joy. And this is going to install the Joy module. Now from here, what we're going to do is actually require it into our application. So I'm going to go up here. I'm going to type const joy is equal to require joy. So now that we have joy in our application, let's actually go down to our request. So we have our get request, which basically serves the form to our user. And we have our post request, which is going to get the data from our user. So from here, what we want to do is actually validate the data that we get within our request body. And in order to do that, what we're going to do is create a schema. So what's a schema? A schema is basically a blueprint, a set of rules that we want our data to have. So we have an email field and we have a password field. So what I want to do is make sure that the email that the user gives me is a valid email. And likewise with the password field. So what we can do here is I could come down here and we can create a schema. Now remember, this is just a blueprint. I'm going to say joy dot object. Now this is going to give us a joy object. Next thing we need to do is call a method called keys. Now keys is going to work the same way that a regular JavaScript file would work. You will have your key value pairs, and we're going to pass in the options. Now within here, what we want to do is set the rules that the data that we're receiving must follow. So we have a field called email, and within here, I'm going to say joy. I'm going to say string. So what I'm saying is the email field must be a string value. I'm going to trim that data that I'm receiving. I'm going to call a method called email, and this is going to check to see whether or not this is a valid email. And I'm going to call one more method called required. Now required does is if the user sends me a null email, in other words, the user doesn't fill out an email, I'm going to get an error because this field is required. So let's go back to our another property, and the next property we have is password. So from here, I'm going to do the same thing, joy. I need it to be of type string, and let's change it up for the password field. So let's say that I need the password to be at least 5 characters. So I'm going to call the min method. I'm going to pass in 5. I'm going to call the max method, and I'm going to pass in 10. So right now, this password must be a minimum of 5 characters long and a maximum of 10 characters. So between 5 and 10. And the last method I'm going to call is required. And now let's end this with a semicolon. So now that we have our blueprint, let's actually use it. So we're going to call a method called validate. So I'm just going to say joy.validate. And it's going to take 3 arguments. The first argument is the object that you want to validate. In this case, remember we use the body parser to parse the form data and attach it to the body of the request object. So this is going to be our first argument. The second argument is going to be our blueprint, which we just created. It's called schema. And our third argument is going to be the callback function. It's going to take 2 parameters. First one is going to be error. Second one is going to be result. And what we can do is find out our results. So if I say if error, this is going to execute true if there's something wrong with the data. So if error is not null, then this code will be executed. So if error is executed, we know something went wrong. So I'm just going to say res.send, an error has occurred. But if there is no error, what we can do is we could just say res.send, and I can say successfully posted data. Now, just for the sake of this tutorial, I'm going to print out result just so you can see what the result is. Now, the result is basically just going to be the data that we passed in. So it's just going to be the request body. And I'm going to go up here and I'm going to print out the error object. So now that I have these 2 out, what we can do is get rid of our old code from the last tutorial. I'm actually going to save this. We're going to type in node app. Let's head over to Chrome. And from here, I'm just going to type in, actually, let's just refresh the page real quick. Let's type in an email. And let's type in a password. And then if I hit submit, you can see successfully posted data. So if I go back to Visual Studio Code, you can see that our email is right here. And it probably hit submit twice because I probably clicked it twice. And you can see that our result that's getting printed out is just the request.body. Is whatever the user posted, and you would do all your database manipulation and calls here. So now let's actually go back to Chrome. And this time we're going to type localhost again. Instead of giving valid data, let's see what happens when we post invalid data. So I'm going to post valid data for email. And for the password, remember we have to give it between 5 and 10 characters long. So I'm just going to give it 2 characters long, and let's see what happens. I'm going to hit submit. And you can see the response we get, an error has occurred. So let's actually take a look at this in Visual Studio Code. You can see this big long mess of mumbo jumbo. So I'm just going to go back up. And you can see the error that we're getting. It says validation error, child password fails because password must be at least 5 characters long. So you can see our validation is working. And this is pretty much the ins and outs of validating user input using Joy. And this is going to be part 2 of my Joy validation tutorial. So in this tutorial, we're going to be covering how we can validate a nested object as well as how we can validate an array. So to get started, I pretty much stripped out all the express stuff, and we're going to simulate a user's request. So for this example, we have this user input, and it is a nested object, and it has a property of personal info with the properties of street address, city, and state. And we have preferences, which is going to be our array, and you can see what values the array contains here. So the first values that we're going to start off with are string values, and then we're going to move on to objects. So the way that I'm going to tackle this problem is I'm going to look at our user input, and I'm going to break it down into sections. So for example, I'm going to develop a schema for personal info, and then I'm going to develop a schema for preferences. So to get started, we're going to develop the personal info schema first. I'm just going to copy this. I'm going to come down here. Now I'm going to say const personal info, and then I'm just going to add schema. Next, I'm going to create a Joy object schema. So I'm just going to say joy.object keys. We're going to hit enter. I'm going to add a semicolon down here. We're going to go up, copy street address. Would just develop a schema like we normally would. So I'm just going to paste that. Street address is going to be joy.string.trim. And we're going to make this required. We're going to do the same thing with the other properties. Go to city, copy this. Go down here, paste. And street address and city, we're going to make the same exact thing. And last but not least, we're going to take the state, and it's going to be the same exact Joy schema, except that we're going to add that it has to be a length of 2. So I'm just going to copy this, paste this here, and we're going to use the .length method and set that to 2. So we're going for state abbreviations. So now that we have our personal info schema out of the way, let's develop a schema for preferences. So I'm going to copy this. We're going to go down here. I'm going to say const for preferences schema. And this time, instead of using joy.object.keys, we're going to say joy.array. And this is going to give us an array schema. And we're going to use a helper method called items. Now what items is going to take in as an argument is basically any schema you want. In this case, what we want is an array of strings. So I'm just going to pass in the schema joy.string. So this is going to make sure that all the items within the array are all strings. Last but not least, let's actually combine these two to form one schema. I'm going to say const schema, and I'm going to say joy.object.keys, pass in this object, and this time we're going to say personal info, and that's going to be equal to the schema we just created up here. So we have our personal info schema, so I'm just going to copy this, paste this here. And now if I go back to my array, we called it preferences. Copy that. Pass this here. Preferences schema. Next, let's actually call this. So I'm going to go down here. I'm going to say joy.validate. The first argument is going to be the same as the last tutorial. So we're just going to say user input. Second argument is the schema. So we're going to use the built-in schema that we made, which consists of the two different schemas that we created separately. Last argument is going to be the callback function. So I'm going to say error result. And I'm going to say if error, we're just going to print out what the error is. Else, just print out the result. And the result is just going to be the user input. So I'm just going to save this. Let's actually add a semicolon here. Save this. We're going to type node app. And you can see that our data is validating. So the basic premise is if you're given a complicated object, break them up into their individual schemas, and then you could combine them like so. Now I want to talk about, let's say that I want an array of objects as opposed to an array of strings. So we're just going to go up here. We're going to change preferences to reference array of objects. And then we have an example object here. So this is a very simplistic example. We just have a property of called example, and it has the value of a string. So example 1, 2, and 3. So we're just going to change this to an array of objects. Let's go down here. And instead of specifying joy.string here, because we're not looking for strings anymore, we can say joy.object.keys. And then we just build our schema like we did before. So in this case, we only have one property. It's called example. And we're going to give it the value of joy.string.required. So this is a very simplistic example. If you had a more complicated object, you would do the same thing like we've been doing. So I'm just going to save this. And let's actually execute this code, see if it's working. Node app. And you can see that it validates and we didn't get any errors. So that's basically how you can develop a schema for a nested object, and how we can develop schemas for arrays and even create our own custom schema objects for those arrays. In this tutorial, we're going to be talking about EJS. Now, what EJS is a template language, and that's going to allow us to write more dynamic web pages. So to get started, what we have here is a static HTML file. You can see that we have dummy data here. So when it says you searched for stuff, and we have search results of dummy data. Now, what we want to do is use this HTML file as a template that we can use for serving dynamic data. So one way to do that is if we go back to Visual Studio Code, we could set the view of our Express application. And in order to do that, we would go here and we could say app.set is going to take in two arguments. We're going to specify the view engine. The second argument is going to be the template that you want to use. So we're just going to say EJS. Once we set the view engine to EJS, we're going to have to hit Control B, and we're going to have to create a folder called views. And this is going to store our EJS templates. So I'm just going to go down here, right click, new folder, and we're going to call this views. Now Express is going to automatically know that our templates are located in the views folder because that's the default folder that it looks for. So now if I create my views folder, if I right click, new file, and instead of saying index.html, I specify index.ejs. So now that I have my index.ejs file, I'm just going to go to my index.html. I'm going to copy all of this, and I'm just going to paste the code within my index.ejs. So now I'm just going to save this. I'm going to go to app.js. And what we do with templates is that we render them to the user. So I'm just going to hit Control B, get rid of the Package Explorer. And instead of sending a static file, I'm just going to remove this. And now we're going to say res.render, and then followed by the name of the file that you want to render, index. Now you do not need to specify the .ejs on the side, and that's because we already told Express that we are using EJS as the template. So now if I was to save this, just going to hit Control C, Node app, head over to Chrome. We're going to hit refresh, and you can see that we get the same exact output. So what happened here? Well, when we rendered this index.ejs file, what's happening is the server is going to look at this EJS file for EJS code. It's going to execute it and then send back to the client an HTML file. So now let's actually send data to send back to our EJS file. So from here, I'm just going to give us a route parameter. I'm just going to say user query. And here we're going to pass in an object. And this is going to be the data that we want to display within our index.ejs template. So now I'm just going to give it a property. First, I'll say data. Then I'll give it a property of user query. And then we're going to pass in request.params.user query. So now if I save this, I'm just going to hit Control C just to exit out of our server. Now we're going to go to our EJS file. We're going to go here to our template. And now from here, we're going to specify less than %, equal. What this means is I want you to output onto the HTML file. Next, what we're going to do is access the data that we just passed in. So how did we do that? Well, we gave it the property data, then we said dot user query. Afterwards, we end it with %, and then that. So now this is going to look at our app.js. It's going to say, okay, I want to render the index page, and this is the data that I'm receiving. So we went to data.user query. So now if I was to save this index.ejs template, let's start back the server, Node app. Let's go to Chrome, hit refresh. You can see that we cannot get / and that's because we added a route parameter. So let's say the user searched for books, for example. Then it says, hey, you searched for books. So imagine if this was a real website and we were on Amazon or eBay, you would do a search. So then on top of that web page, you would get, hey, you searched for books. You searched for PCs. You searched for whatever. So that means I could use this EJS template for all the items within my website. So now let's actually add some dummy data. So if I go back to Visual Studio Code, and what we're going to do is instead of having hard-coded stuff here, when the user types in, we search for books, we're going to display a bunch of books. So I'm just going to go to app.js. We're going to pass in more dummy data. So we have data, user query. We're going to pass in another thing. And I'm just going to give it a enter key to make it fit all on one line. And we're going to pass in an array, and this is going to be the search results. Search results. Pass in an array, and we're just going to say book 1, book 2, and book 3. So now if I save this, go to my index.ejs EJS file. Instead of saying dummy data, what we can do is we could go to data because that's the object that we're passing in. We're going to say search results. And then since it's an array, we can access index 0. And this is going to give us our first position. And remember, since this is an EJS template, we're going to have to wrap this up within the following. And now if I was to save this, let's cancel out the server, restart it up, go to Chrome, hit refresh, and you can see that now we're dynamically populating the web page. So now let's head back to Visual Studio Code. And what I want to do is, instead of just outputting data.searchResults.index0, data.searchResults.index1, what we can do is use a for each loop. So for example, let's get rid of all this. And instead of that, we're going to pass in less than %. We're going to get our array. So what's our array at? Data.searchResults.for each. We get our result. And remember, we're going to end this with a %, less than. And the reason why we don't have an equal sign here is because we are not outputting this onto the HTML file. So for example, if I want to output this, equal sign. If you don't want to output it, no equal sign. Next, within here, what we're going to do is we're going to display what we want to output. So now what we're going to do is use less than %, equal, because we actually want this to output to the HTML file. So I'm just going to say li result, and let's close our li tag. So now we have to end this. So we're just going to end it with %. We're not going to use the equal sign because we do not want to output this to the user. So now if I was to save this, I'm going to go down here, Control C, Node app, go to Chrome, hit refresh, and you can see that our search results gets dynamically added. So if we searched for books and there was 1,000,000 books, this code will work for 1,000,000 books. If we searched for iPhones and there was only 3 types of iPhones, this code will work for 3 iPhones. So now let's do an example involving conditionals. So we're just going to give a simple if statement. If the user is logged in, we want you to display this. If the user is not logged in, then we're not going to display anything extra. So now if I go back to Visual Studio Code, let's write an if statement underneath our h1 tag. So I'm just going to go here. I'm going to say this. If data.loggedIn, and this is going to be a Boolean containing true or false. Let's end this here. And now the meat of our if statement is going to be the HTML output that we want to do. So now I'm just going to say h2, you are logged in as data.username. And that %, and then let's close our h2 tag. Now we have to wrap up our if statement. So let's close our if statement. And all we're going to do is just do the following EJS. Close our if statement. And remember, we're not using the equal sign because we're not wanting to output this. And we're not using the equal sign up here because we don't want to output this if statement. So now if I was to save our index.ejs file, let's go to app.js. And we're going to pass in those properties that we added to our index.ejs file. So we passed in logged in. And for this example, we're just going to set true. And the username is going to be this. So I'm just going to go to index.ejs just to see if we matched up properly. Otherwise, we're going to get an error. Logged in. We use the username here. Make sure everything matches up. Let's save this. Control C. Node app. Head over to Chrome. Hit refresh. And you can see that since we are logged in, we're displaying our h2 tag. You are logged in as so-and-so. If we set that to false, our h2 tag wouldn't appear. So that's basically the ins and outs of how you can use EJS within your Express application. In this tutorial, we're going to be talking about what middleware is and how we can create our own custom middleware. So middleware is basically the code that gets executed between the user request and the server itself. Now, in the previous tutorials, we already used a middleware, and that middleware was within the Body Parser Module. So if you take a look at our Express application, on line 5, we say app.use, and then as an argument, we pass in a function. And this function is a middleware function that when the user makes a request, this function will take the user's request and process it. In this case, the bodyparser.json function checks to see if the user sent any JSON data, processes it, and then attaches it to the request.body. And then it calls a function called next to let the server know that, hey, we're done processing this request. You can send another request. So to get started, we're just going to go down here. I'm going to say app.use, and then we're going to pass in our own middleware function that's going to get executed whenever the user makes a request. So this should be very familiar. We're going to pass in the first parameter is going to be the request object, the response, and then the final parameter is going to be the next method. So now we already are familiar with the request object and the response object. So what is this next method? This next method must be invoked whenever you create a custom middleware. So what the next method is responsible for is to let Express know that, hey, I'm finished processing this request. If you do not call the next method, what's going to end up happening is you're going to time out the server, because it has no idea whether or not you're finished processing the request or not. So right now, I'm just going to say next, and we're just going to call it. And to make things a little bit more interesting, let's actually go up here, and I am going to print out the request.url and the request.method. So now if I was to save this, let's actually restart the server. So I'm just going to hit Control C, Node app. I'm going to go to Chrome. I'm going to hit refresh. Now, when I hit refresh, what I did was make a GET request to the server. So let's actually take a look at Visual Studio Code to see what happened. And you can see that our middleware is running. So we made a request. It gives us the URL. It gives us the method of the request. So we made a GET request when we hit refresh. And then we said next, which let Express know that, hey, he's done processing this. And then it got to this point where we just sent res.send middleware onto the user. So that's why you see that we got this. Now let's change this up. So instead of saying / because we got a get route there, let's just make something up. Now if I hit enter, you can see cannot get whatever this route is, but that's okay because we're not interested in that. We're only interested in the middleware for this tutorial. And you can see once again that our middleware is running fine. So whenever there's a request made from the user, this middleware function is going to get executed. And you can see that our route was printed out and the type of request was also printed out onto the console. Now, this is all fine and dandy, but as we have it right now, whenever we use app.use and we have our middleware, any user request is going to get processed by this middleware. Let's say that I only want this middleware to execute when a certain route gets requested. So right here, I'm just going to go here and I'm just going to say example. And this is going to be our route. And now, whenever we call this example route, it could be any type of request. It could be a get request, post request, put, delete, doesn't matter. This middleware is going to execute. But if it doesn't match this example route, then it's not going to execute. So let's save this. And I'm just going to hit Control-C, Node app, start this up again. And now I'm just going to hit refresh. Go back to Visual Studio Code. And you can see that our middleware is not executing. But if I go up here, type example, go back to Visual Studio Code, and you can see that our middleware is executing just fine. And the last thing that you should note that middleware functions can do is modify the request object and the response object. So going back to our body parser example, it parses the user's request and searches for JSON and then attaches it to the request.body. So to give a trivial example, I can say take the user's request and I can add a property called banana. And I could assign it the value of banana. And for the sake of simplicity, since we already have this route here, we're just going to get rid of all this. And within our get route, we're just going to say console.log request.banana. So let's end that with a semicolon. Let's double check everything. And this looks good. So I'm just going to save this. And we're going to restart the server, Node app. We're going to go to Chrome. And we're going to hit our root. And there we go. If we go back to Visual Studio Code, you can see what's going on here. We made a request to the server. The server did some processing, the same thing that Body Parser did, and then adds to the request object. In this case, we just added banana, gave it a value of banana. And then here, when we got the request from our get route, you can see that we get the output of banana. So that's pretty much the ins and outs of how you can create your own custom middleware and how middleware works in general. In this tutorial, we're going to be talking about the Express router. Now, what the Express router allows us to do is separate our routes into different files. This makes our code a lot more manageable as opposed to just sticking all our routes within the app.js file. So to get started, I'm just going to hit Control-B to bring up our Explorer. I'm going to create a new folder to store all our routes. So I'm just going to right click here, new folder. Let's call it routes. And we're going to create a new file called people. So this is where we're going to store all our people routes. So I'm just going to hit Control-B again. And since we're using the Express router, we're obviously going to need to include the Express module. So I'm just going to say const express is equal to require express. Next, we're going to call it express.router, which is a method that's going to return to us an instance of the router. So we're just going to save that within a variable. So I'm just going to say const route is equal to express.router. So now that we have our router instance, what we can do is set up our route. So we already know how to do that. So I could say route.get, and we're just going to give it the path, and we're going to give it the callback. So the request object, the response, and we're just going to say res.send / being hit. And let's just create another route. So I'm just going to copy this for our example. And I'm going to call this example. And let's say example being hit. Now we're not done yet. So right now we have this route here. But how do we expose this route so that our app.js file can access it? Well, in order to do that, we're going to have to use module.exports. So I could go down here, type module.exports, and then we're just going to export this route that we created. So now I'm going to save this. We're going to head back to our app.js file. And now down here, we're going to have to actually require the people route. So how do we do that? Well, I'm going to create a variable called people, and we're just going to require the file. So I'm just going to say .. I'm going to go inside the routes folder, and then I'm going to include our people file. But we're not done yet. Remember, on line 3, we created an Express application. So now we need to tell our Express application that we want to use this people route. So let's go down here. I'm going to say app.use. And we're going to give it the base URL. So I'm just going to say / people. And then we're going to pass in the people route as the second argument. So I'm just going to pass in people. So now if I was to save this, head over down here, Node app. Let's go to Chrome. I'm going to type localhost port 3000. And that's because we do not have a base URL. Remember, we gave it people. So this is our base URL for this people's route. So right now, this / would be accessed if I just typed people at the end of localhost. So I'm just going to add that people. And now you can see our / is being hit. And if I add another / and do example, you can see our example route is being hit. So now what happens if you want to add middleware to these routes? So I'm just going to go back to Visual Studio Code. We're going to go to our people route. And within here, I could say route.use and then pass in our function, our middleware function that we want to execute. So I could pass in my request object, my res, and next. And now I'm just going to say console.log middleware being used. Now when I use route.use, all request is going to go through this middleware. So remember to always call next if you're ever creating your own custom middleware. And now if I was to save this, let's hit Control-C, Node app. We're going to go to Chrome, hit refresh, and you can see that our middleware is being used here. Now this middleware is only going to be used within our people route. If we had another route here, let's say instead of people we had an animal route, this middleware is obviously not going to get executed because this middleware is only specified to work with our people route. So that's pretty much the ins and outs of how you can use the Express router to actually separate your routes from the app.js file